Okay, for this video, you're going to need your formula chart for Math of Finance and your notes on compound interest and annual percentage yield. So if we start with the formula chart, if we're going to be looking at compound interest, here are the formulas we're going to be looking at. So notice these are quite a bit more complicated than simple interest. So first of all, we have three different formulas, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to pick the correct formula. But another thing that's difficult is if you look at I is your periodic interest rate, and then N is the total number of times compounded. So we're going to use I and N in these two formulas. And if you go down to the bottom, you'll see that I and N are both formulas themselves. So there is a lot more to look at. So on our first examples, we're just going to be practicing picking some information out of problems. So for number one, we want to find these things if we have 3% compounded quarterly for 8 years. So what this means is the word quarterly, we want to think of that as 4 times a year. So we want to associate that with the number 4, kind of like there's 4 quarters in a dollar. So 4 times a year, they're going to take our interest, they're going to roll it back into the principal, and we're going to start making interest on our interest. So what this does is it allows your money to grow a little bit faster. All right, so if we go through, the first one is the interest rate. That one's pretty easy to find. It will be 3%. Or remember, if we put it into a formula, we have to move the decimal 2 places, so 0.03. And don't ever round a percent unless it asks for you to. We have the length of the investment in years. We can see 8 years here. Then we get to the periodic interest rate. This is I. The formula for I is R divided by M. Now we just found R. That's going to be our interest rate. So that's going to be 0.03. So you do have to put that in as a decimal. Now if we look back at our formula chart for M, M is the number of times compounded per compounding period. So that sounds really complicated, but that's where this 4 comes from. So we get from this that M is 4. Right, so we're going to go 0.03 divided by 4. So 0.03 divided by 4, and that comes out 0.0075. Now if we convert this back into a rate, we would go 2 places to the right, so that would also be 0.75%. We want to be really careful here not to round. People don't like it when you round when they're playing with money, right? So we're going to leave those alone just like they are. And the number of periods in the investment, that's going to be N. So again, if we go back to our formula chart, that's going to be M times T. So remember, we're compounding quarterly, which is 4 times a year, and we're going to do that for 8 years. So it's going to compound a total of 32 times. So that's how many times your interest is going to get dumped back into your principal, and you start making interest on your interest. All right, let's try number 2. 6.25% compounded monthly for 10 years. So notice we have monthly. We know there's 12 months in a year, so when we see that, we're thinking 12. All right, so our interest rate is 6.25%. If we want to use it in a formula, we have to go 2 places to the left. Don't round, that's going to be 0.0625. Length of investment in years will be 10. Now for the periodic interest rate, this is I. So this is going to be R divided by M. So remember, R has to be a decimal, so we have to come back and get this one, 0.0625. And remember, we're compounding monthly, so our M is going to be 12. All right, so 0.0625 divided by 12. And this one we're going to have to round at least a little bit because it's going to keep going on forever. So generally we want 2 decimal places in our percent, so we want at least 4 to start out with. I'm going to go ahead and do 5. So 0.00521. That 8 is going to round that 0 up to a 1. So that's going to be 0.00521. And the reason I want to go out a bunch of decimal places is because I am going to change it to a percent. And it's going to be 0.521%. So you don't want to just knock this down to a couple of decimal places, because you would end up, if you rounded here, you would end up with 0.01, which would be 1%, and that's not very close to the value you have here. So you want to keep lots of decimal places. If it doesn't tell you, I would keep at least 5. All right, and then number of periods in the investment, that's going to be M times T. Remember, we're compounding monthly, so that's 12 times a year for 10 years. So we're going to compound 120 times.